Welcome back to Third Eye Weekly. Today we're here with Wendy Stovall, volcanologist for the United States Geological Survey. Thank you so much for joining us today, Wendy.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's good to see you.
Awesome. So, what are some of the overall objectives of the Volcano Hazards Program? How were you guys first created, and how much has it changed over the years?
Well, the original volcano monitoring system was set up in Hawaii in 1911, and that was really the first volcano observatory that existed within the United States. And there were a few other scientists after that that worked studying volcanoes around the United States, and then Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980. And it was really at that point that the Volcano Hazards Program was launched and was given a lot of federal funding. So yeah, we were born out of a big eruption, imagine that. And we since then have pretty much held on to the same tenets, which are to protect people, protect property and life, and to minimize the economic impacts of volcanic eruptions. And that's really been what we've been trying to do since the initiation of the monitoring that started in Hawaii in 1911. And we do that in a few different ways. We assess volcanic hazards by going out and looking at volcanoes and seeing when they erupted last, doing chemical analysis of rocks and looking at big outcrops of volcanoes in place. And we also monitor volcanoes, so we put instruments out on volcanoes that we feel are potentially the most threatening and make sure that they aren't showing any signs of unrest. And we provide any warnings that we assess of volcanoes that might be erupting soon to agencies that can help to plan for those impacts. So we look at the hazards and we help agencies plan for impacts of hazards. So that would be like state and local governments, where they have to do planning, and people are building houses. We want to make sure they're not building houses in the path of a lahar, for instance, which is a volcanic mud flow. So we work with state agencies and try to do a lot of education too.
Yeah, some people might not know, but there's a congressional mandate that states that you must issue timely warnings of potential volcanic hazards to authorities and populations that are affected. Is it hard to fulfill that mandate well in advance? And what do you do about volcanic hazards that arise at really short notice?
So it's really not that hard as long as volcanoes are very well monitored. So for the ones that we've determined are the most threatening, which are the ones that are close to population centers and that have erupted within the last 10,000 years or so, we make sure that there's a tight network of instruments looking at the earthquakes or the ground movement or the gas that's coming out of those volcanoes. And any change from the normal background level of activity, we're able to detect, and then we can monitor that and then look at the history of the eruption record and see whether or not a volcano might actually be starting to erupt. Volcanoes don't typically erupt suddenly. They erupt kind of over a long, drawn-out phase of, slowly coming to life, basically. And so we would have ample warning, typically, knowing whether or not a volcano is going to erupt. So we don't get surprised that often, fortunately.
So you were talking about using some of these different instruments to monitor the volcanoes. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what they are and maybe if they've changed at all over recent decades.
Okay, yeah, they've definitely changed a lot. Some of the original instruments were like leveling instruments, where you go out and you measure one point on the ground and then you measure another point on the ground and then you look at the distance between those two instruments. And if the distance gets longer over time or shorter over time, the ground has been moving. Now we use the GPS system to do the same thing. So the GPS system started for commercial use and business use more in the late 90s and the early 2000s. So GPS is one thing we definitely use to determine ground movement. And seismometers have changed a lot. There used to be analog and one signal and recorded ground movement and shaking on smoke with smoke on drums. And now all of that stuff is, they're called Webby quarters. So all of the data on seismometers are digital and broadband, and they go directly to a stream of, they go via the internet into a web-trained data tool where people can analyze data from seismometers all over the world in one single location. We use a lot of gas monitoring instruments as well, and those gas monitoring instruments have gone from the size of what used to be like 3 turkeys, imagine, 3 giant turkeys, and now you can get that same set of instruments into a deck of cards, and you can put an instrument out on a volcano instead of having to lug it around in a helicopter and leave the instrument there and have it record continuous gas data on site. So on the gas, we're looking for carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide concentrations, and those tell us what the volcanoes are doing, whether or not they're coming back to life or just kind of puffing along at their normal breathing exhalation rates. Yeah, so those are really the main 3 instruments in our arsenal of determining what's going on in volcanoes. There's other new technologies too, like infrasound, where you put out microphones on a volcano and you get the low, super low rumble of an eruption. So we use those at remote locations, like in Alaska, and we can determine if volcanoes are erupting there. We also use satellites to look at imagery of volcanoes, so that's a new technology that's developed since all these satellites are being put in the air, and we can sense heat coming out of the ground via those satellites. So we use that at a lot of our Alaska volcanoes that are more remote. But those are also very dangerous because they're right in flight paths. There's tons of airlines that fly over the Aleutian Islands in Alaska, and if ash gets injected up into the flight path of an airline, then it could cause it to come to the ground. So we make sure we know what's going on in Alaska for sure.
So what are some examples of recent response warnings that were issued for mountains expected to erupt?
So recently there was an eruption. The eruption changed in Hawaii, where lava was flowing directly towards a town, and because of that we ramped up the ground-based hazard. So we have 2 tiers of our hazards or alerts and notifications, and one is a ground-based, and then the other is an aviation color code. So if ash is getting injected into the atmosphere, then we will notify airlines. And so in Hawaii, there was no ash that was being produced. It was just a ground-based hazard. So we had the warning, which was the highest level alert for lava flows that might be inundating that town. And we recently just dropped that back down to a watch instead of a warning, because the flows stopped going towards the town, and they're no longer threatening the area, which is good. Of course, we're still keeping an eye on everything to make sure that they don't change direction again. And if they do, then we will have to issue a new warning. Alaska always has some volcanoes erupting, it seems like. And so there's constantly movement in the volcano alert level for those Alaska volcanoes. And typically those are the color codes, which are the aviation ones, and sometimes they'll go through green, which is normal, and then showing signs of unrest, they go to yellow, and then if there's actually an eruption, a small eruption maybe, it'll go to red. And so right now things are okay. There's a couple of orange volcanoes in Alaska, and Hawaii, Kilauea is still sitting at orange as well, and warning.
So there are currently, I guess, 65 or so volcanoes in the U.S. that scientists consider active. I'm wondering which volcanoes are on heightened alert for volcanic activity.
We actually consider there to be about 169 volcanoes that are considered active, and those are just based on historic eruption. But currently, there are only a few that are active, and those are a couple in Alaska, and then the one in Hawaii. And the other ones on the mainland, in the mainland U.S., the one volcano that will probably erupt again most recently will be Mount St. Helens. And we aren't sure when that's going to happen. There are some signs that there's some seismicity. There's seismicity beneath the volcano that's indicating that the magma is recharging, so it's pulling back up into the volcanic system. But there's no imminent threat from that at all. We have that volcano very well monitored, so we're able to see these very subtle changes and know that there's magma moving into that system.
So taking a look at another specific example, Mount Hood has increasing in monitoring, right?
Yes.
About just what's going on there. Is there a potential sign for future eruptions?
So Mount Hood is one of the highest threat, meaning a volcano that is situated very near a population center that has a recent eruptive history. So because of that, we want to make sure that we know that it's very well monitored, just like Mount St. Helens. So we know that if anything changes from that normal background level, we'll be able to really keep an eye on it to ensure that if there is any sign that the volcano is going to erupt, then we can make sure that we inform the state and local emergency management agencies so that people can get out of the way if we think that it is going to happen. But right now there's no sign. It's continuing along its normal background level. We just need to get some a tighter knit network of monitoring instruments up on close to the peak of that volcano. So right now we have instruments that are more spread out around the base and on the flanks, but we need to get a few more on the summit or near the summit.
So given how sophisticated your monitoring networks are nowadays for volcanoes, do you think there's any chance that there could be a volcanic disaster or catastrophe similar to Mount St. Helens or what happened with Nevado del Ruiz?
We really hope not. And that's kind of going back to the first question that you asked about our mission and our goals. I mean, we did a very large assessment of all of the volcanoes that we consider active in the United States back in 2005. And since that point, we've been working to close the gap on the monitoring. So if we saw any gap or any missing, any volcanoes that we thought were missing monitoring networks, we want to make sure that we're getting those instruments in the ground so we really know whether or not the volcanoes that are sitting closest to population centers that are most likely to erupt have the instruments that we need on them to ensure that we can make sure that there aren't those catastrophes. So fingers crossed, no, I don't see that happening. I think that our goal is to make sure we have a handle on that.
Excellent. Well, that's definitely good news. I've got one more question for you. Have you personally experienced a volcano erupting out of curiosity?
I did a lot of research in Hawaii, so I've been up and close and personal with lava flows, and nothing hugely explosive. I've definitely seen some ash billowing up into the air, and I've walked across lava flows and have my boots melted for sure. Yeah, but I even had my eyebrows singed off once from getting too close to an open vent on top of a lava tube. So and that was, yeah, it's sometimes dangerous, but mostly we try to keep really safe. So that was just a wind direction change that caused that to happen. But yeah, lava and me are good friends.
Well, Wendy, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You guys have a great day.
You too.
You too.
Thanks.